When the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed in the Patapsco River around 1:30 a.m. Eastern Time yesterday, at least 8 people went missing. 2 were swiftly rescued, one of whom remains hospitalized. 6 others, however, are now presumed dead. We don't have many details on these 6 victims, but we know they came to America from Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. We don't know their immigration status. We don't know how long all of them lived and worked in America. We do know their work was, on the very best days, backbreaking and perilous. These immigrants fixed potholes and made other repairs on a road that was suspended more than 180 feet above the chilly river waters below. We know they often worked in the middle of the night. We know the bridge spans swayed. We know that cars sped by them at frightening speeds. We also know this. In the past 10 years or so, at least since June 2015, workers like these immigrants from Mexico or Central American countries have been habitually and intentionally slandered as violent criminals, mental defectives, or carriers of wicked diseases. Statistically, those slanders have never, ever been true. But the slanders have resonated and spawned a kind of snarling fear and resentment in certain parts of our American political landscape. The workers who died yesterday must be mourned, their families comforted, economic redress made. But even more, let us hope, no, let us resolve that their deaths may begin to dislodge the rabid contemporary reflex to scorn those who come to America to work, to flee violence, to find a better life, to turn shovels and fill potholes while we warmly sleep. We have an update on the Baltimore bridge collapse. Our Natalie Brand has more.
Well, these recovery efforts have been described as dangerous and extremely intense, complicated today by the weather. And we've learned this evening that divers recovered 2 victims who were inside a red pickup truck submerged in the water. 2 victims out of the 6 construction workers who were on the bridge at the time of the collapse. We're told their families have been notified. State officials describing the victims as husbands and fathers. We've learned that they were from Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. This is a community in mourning, with also a long road ahead in terms of trying to clear the channel and eventually rebuild the bridge, with really no timeline given at this point. The Transportation Secretary today saying that this is not going to be quick or easy. At the same time, the NTSB is ramping up its investigation. They've obtained the voyage data recorder that was on board the ship, and we are hoping to get a sense of the timeline as to what went wrong on the cargo ship, the Dolly, before it crashed into a critical support beam of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. And of course, huge questions remain about the next steps, when this port will reopen, and the economic impact, not only local to the thousands of workers employed directly by the port, but also the ripple effects nationwide, since the Port of Baltimore is the #1 port in the country for vehicle imports and exports. Major.
Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now from the North Lawn of the White House. Caitlin, great to see you as always. This bridge collapse obviously dominated today's White House briefing. Among the things you learned, what stands out?
Hey, Major, good to see you. Well, the focus of the administration right now is, as Chris mentioned, getting that port cleared out and ready for business again. The biggest questions that we had for White House officials, including Pete Buttigieg, who was at the White House briefing today, was kind of what this timeline looks like in terms of rebuilding the bridge, but also reopening this port. The economic impact of this, of course, is likely to be felt more regionally, but still really important nonetheless. This is a place where $100 to $200 million in cargo value goes in and out. About $2 million in jobs. There are local jobs that they are concerned about as well in terms of longshoremen. So the priority right now is that kind of clearance, them focused on rebuilding. I asked Pete Buttigieg what a timeline may look like in this case, and he said it's too soon to say, but take a listen.
When it comes to the actual port, can you give us a sense of what the timeline would be for reopening? Is it days? Is it weeks? Is it months? And same for the bridge. Are we talking about weeks, months? Are we talking about years?
Too soon to be certain. What I'll say in the case of the bridge is that the original bridge took 5 years to construct. That does not necessarily mean it will take 5 years to replace. As far as the port, again, too soon to venture an estimate. The vast majority of the port is inside of that bridge, which means most of it cannot operate.
Now, Major, he also referenced the I-95 portion of I-95 bridge that collapsed near Philadelphia recently, and said that these two aren't really comparable. The important thing here, of course, is this is a huge bridge over vast amounts of water, whereas that one was over land. So really kind of tempering expectations in terms of recovery. But the mission today, too, is focusing on the funds that will be necessary for this kind of rebuild, and the administration making clear that they will, in their words, move heaven and earth to make sure this rebuild is possible with all resources needed from the federal government.
Caitlin, there was also an official from the Coast Guard at the White House briefing today talking about some discovery of hazardous materials on board the cargo ship. Any particular danger to the public or to the waterway?
Right. He said there's no imminent danger to the public or the waterway. This is also something that is going to be continued to be investigated by the NTSB. On that note, however, there are a lot of questions about what the liability is for this the company that owns this vessel, especially as we're talking about funding for the rebuilding of this bridge and reopening of this port. I asked Secretary Buttigieg if they have had communication with the owner of the vessel in terms of the liability, accountability, any sort of culpability for funds there. And he said, look, we're waiting for the NTSB investigation to conclude, but everyone will be held accountable if needed. But the administration is saying today, we don't have any time to wait for that. They want to release federal funds and already have as soon as possible emergency funds here. And importantly, they're calling on Congress to also take action here. They're waiting for Maryland to officially make that federal assistance request. But Buttigieg said today that they will likely depend on Congress to move some funds as well, and kind of urged this Congress that, as we know, has been divided on everything, to make sure there's bipartisanship here.
Caitlin Huey-Burns at the White House, thank you very much. Former Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman has died. His family said he passed away due to complications from a fall inside his home. Lieberman served in the Senate for more than 2 decades before he was succeeded by Chris Murphy. Lieberman was also on Vice President Gore's 2000 presidential ticket. Joe Lieberman was 82 years old. Former President Trump is hoping to profit off making America pray again. That's right. With his latest venture, it's selling Bibles for $60. More on that next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. According to a new poll, the majority of Americans now oppose Israel's military action in Gaza. On Tuesday, President Biden acknowledged pro-Palestinian protesters who interrupted his speech in North Carolina. Let's listen.
They have a point. We need to get a lot more care into Gaza.
I want to bring in our political panel now. Shelby Talcott and Hannah Knowles join me now at the table. Shelby is a politics reporter for Semaphore, and Hannah is a national political reporter for The Washington Post. Shelby, I want to start with you. Is what's happening in Gaza a foreign policy political fault line for this White House? And if so, how potentially damaging?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And if you talk to Biden campaign officials, they will acknowledge that this is something that, A, they're taking seriously and keeping an eye on, and B, they're recognizing that it is impacting the president's support. There's a growing number of past Joe Biden supporters who are growing increasingly frustrated with him over his Israel policy. And so we've seen, as in that clip, he's starting to sort of try to do some outreach. But as of now, it's not necessarily enough. So the question is, how far is the president comfortable going on this topic? And is it going to be enough for those voters, or do they end up staying home in the 2024 election?
And Hannah, this is a difficult situation for the president. He has a decades-long relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister. But the Israeli prime minister has a coalition government made up of hardliners who want him to be even more aggressive than he currently is. And the president can only weigh in so much and sway so much of Netanyahu's agenda.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really tough issue for Biden. And I think their hands are sort of like, there's no way that they can appease a lot of these protesters and members of their coalition. I mean, I just can't see Biden taking an action that would make a lot of these people happy. It's a tough situation.
This is Holy Week in America, worldwide, and President Trump, former President Trump, has sort of stepped into this terrain in a kind of, even by Trumpian standards, highly unusual marketing way. Hannah, talk about the former president and his now peddling of Bibles.
Yeah, so this is just the latest. We've had NFTs, he's done sneakers, and now he's doing Bibles.
Water, steaks, all sorts of things.
Yeah. And so, he is not directly selling the Bibles, but he owns a company that has licensed his image for the Bibles, so he is earning money off of them.
And he is endorsing it. I believe, Control Room, we have a soundbite to that effect, do we not? Can we roll that?
All Americans need a Bible in their home, and I have many. It's my favorite book. It's a lot of people's favorite book. This Bible is a reminder that the biggest thing we have to bring back America and to make America great again is our religion. Religion is so important. It's so missing, but it's going to come back, and it's going to come back strong, just like our country is going to come back strong.
Shelby, there'll be plenty in our audience who might remember the former president's reference to 2 Corinthians. I don't know if that falls squarely in my favorite book category or not, but your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is, it sort of lines up with how Donald Trump has billed himself. He's really billed himself as sort of this defender of Christian values against, the hard left. And it's something that voters historically have bought into, as we've seen. I also think it's notable, he is facing a lot of financial trouble. In the grand scheme of things, based on the financial troubles, this is whatever he gets from this will just be a drop in the bucket. But it's money coming in, and it's money coming in during a time when he's running a presidential campaign, and Joe Biden is far ahead in terms of how much money they're working with. And he's, he owes millions and millions of dollars in these legal cases.
I want to ask both of you, starting with you, Hannah, about this Alabama special election that just was concluded. What should we be reading into it, and what should we cautiously not be reading into it, possibly?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's another indicator that abortion really does matter to voters. It's still potent, and that the IVF issue, there's good reason to think that has reignited it. And, this was in Alabama, the state where that is maybe most potent, but I think Democrats are really optimistic that this continues to translate in every race they run.
Shelby, the last time there was a vote in this district, it went one way and it flipped over.
Yeah, and if you talk to Marilyn Lands, who won this special election, my colleague talked to her earlier today, and she highlighted how a few years ago, pre-Dobbs, she really focused her pitch on health care, but it didn't really include abortion. And so this time around, I think it just shows that there's a shifting landscape when it comes to what voters are concerned about. And certainly when you talk to the Biden campaign, they recognize that. They have seen consistently that the topic of abortion has been a political win for them. And if you talk to Republicans, too, they recognize that they're failing on this issue, and they need to figure out a way to have an effective message. And it's become increasingly more difficult in a post-Dobbs decision orbit.
And when the political landscape includes shifting special election outcomes, even in a place like Alabama, everyone needs to pay attention. Shelby Talcott and Hannah Knowles, thank you so very much. Immigrants are coming to the southern border in record numbers. My colleague Ed O'Keefe spoke to the president of Guatemala about the issue. That's next. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Guatemala's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said in a statement that 2 of the workers now presumed dead in the Baltimore bridge collapse were from their country. Prior to learning of their deaths, CBS News' Ed O'Keefe spoke with the country's president about migration from his country to the United States southern border.
Back in 2021, when she visited Guatemala, the vice president famously said,
"Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border."
Do you think anyone listened?
Well, I don't know. You do the numbers. But what we are doing is that we're working together because what we agree is that we have to work to allow people what we call the right to stay. People have a right to remain in their places.
You know that most Guatemalans stay put, don't leave, or as you say, have the right to stay. For those that do leave, why do you think they leave Guatemala?
Well, almost 20% of the Guatemalans living today are abroad, and mostly in the United States. And this is a huge amount of our population. The people continue to go out of the country, and they are doing so particularly from those regions where you cannot find work or economic opportunities. We have a population that lives under 60%. 60% of our population lives under the line of poverty. We have 70% of our economically active population in the informal sector, meaning they don't have access to formal services. They do not participate in the economy. They have very limited access to poor quality services in education, in health, and so on.
You said in your meeting with the vice president that you recognize that many of the problems we face are structural and long-standing and cannot be solved in a short period of time.
Exactly.
Nor without support and cooperation from the United States and other key international friends. With respect, why should the United States keep sending money to help Guatemala?
What we are trying to say is fundamentally about cooperation is not sending money. Cooperation can be by creating conditions in which we can invite you to invest in Guatemala and establish factories, works that can begin to produce and create jobs. That's fundamentally what we are most interested in. And we believe our country presents huge opportunities for investment and the development of factories that can then bring products back into the United States or export to other places over the world. So international cooperation is a fundamental principle which is good for everybody.
And to those that might think, you know, the United States has been trying to help this region for so long and it doesn't seem to stop the flow of migrants, what would you say?
Well, because there has been scant attention to the critical issues of focusing on good governance. When you have governments that concentrate on, that stop corruption and graft, that fight corruption, and that begin to invest into development, then you're going to have the results that you need. And the countries in Latin America, in which you have this type of governments and regimes which are working, are governments in which people are voting to stay in, want to stay in. People do not migrate by choice. They migrate because the conditions force them to do it.
You know that there's a chance later this year Donald Trump may win the White House again in this country. He's somebody who has a far different view of how immigration should be handled, and has said things like migrants are not people. He's called them animals, and says they speak languages that Americans don't know. When you hear someone say that about people who are trying to get into this country, what do you think?
Well, I think that in general, it is a huge mistake to dehumanize and criminalize people that are just exercising which is a fundamental right, the right to move. Migration has been with the human civilization since the day Lucy walked out of the Rift Valley in Kenya, and they continue walking in search of different places. And we have to understand the problem and to begin to understand exactly what are all the conditions that happen around this problem in order to be able to solve it. Otherwise, the problem is not going to be solved, whatever we consider about or qualify what is happening.
Do you think migrants will be safe in the United States if Donald Trump is elected president again?
Well, we are looking forward to work with whoever wins in the next election to support and work so that our citizens that are residents in the United States enjoy full rights.
Do you think border walls work?
I think that history shows they don't.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming America Decides.